Okay, I think we're recording now. Welcome everyone to our cafecito con la Illinois Legislative Latino Caucus Foundation Alumni Association. We want to thank all the members of the ILCF Alumni Association for putting together this cafecito, and to Representative Barbara Hernandez for her leadership and guidance as the chair of the Alumni Association. We want to remind you that the video recording and the slides will be emailed to you after the cafecito. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat or wait after the presentation. Today's cafecito's topic is navigating, negotiating, and adapting the intersection between honoring our heritage and identity formation. And it's presented by Dr. Pamela Fullerton, who is an ILCF scholarship recipient and a member of our Alumni Association committee. Dr. Fullerton is the founder and clinical director of Advocacy and Education Consulting, a counseling and consulting organization dedicated to promoting social justice and advocacy through equitable access to mental health and well-being services. She is a Latina, bilingual, licensed clinical professional counselor who specializes in working with Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, undocumented communities, immigration and acculturation, trauma, anxiety, life transitions, and career counseling. In addition to being a professional writer and speaker, Dr. Fullerton serves as an adjunct professor in the Counseling Education Department at Northeastern Illinois University. She's also a volunteer, contributing writer for multiple publications, runs a nonprofit supporting Latinx youth in the Chicagoland area, and consults for behavioral health advisory boards, providing insight and guidance to promote health equity and justice initiatives for underserved communities across Illinois. And without any further ado, let me welcome Dr. Fullerton. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Juan Carlos. You're gonna have my bio memorized at some point.
Yes, I am. This is wonderful. I love it.
Thank you so
We're so
much.
proud
I
of you. Thank
appreciate
you.
that. I appreciate it. Yes. Well, I'm so glad to be here today when we were deciding on our next cafecito, what it should be. We talked about this idea of our heritage, and I think we were talking about it as Hispanic Heritage Month was going on, and identity formation, where so many of us Latinos are navigating, where do we belong? What does our identity mean for us? How much is it actually ours versus somebody else's storyline, somebody else's identity that was given to us? And so that's where this, my baby was created out of that. So this is really special to be able to present this idea. And I'll talk about where, for me, identity formation as a therapist became really important to the work that I was doing with my clients. So, I mean, you can like look at any article, read, the news, the media, social media, hear conversations. There are so many words when it comes to Latinidad. Like, what does it mean? And each of these words have so much history attached to it. And so throughout my presentation, I'm going to be talking about the significance of history, right? And that's where the honoring our heritage part comes from, is really recognizing it. But I do want to mention, certain of these that are going to be highlighted in the conversation today. Things like being a no sabo kid, which is a recent social media trend around being part of a generation of Latinos who didn't learn how to speak Spanish, or who learned how to speak Spanglish, if you will, and how that has formed an identity crisis, if you will, among that generation of Latinos. This idea of sin vergüenza, there's a whole climate and community around sin vergüenza culture in the Latina culture. to feel shame, how so many decisions that we make are surrounded around this idea of shame or being shameful or having shame or being without shame, as the literal translation says. And there's been a movement to shift the paradigm around what it means to have shame and instead feeling empowered by not having shame around doing what you want to do or having a voice or not letting yourself be invisible, right? So, although these terms have been around in our communities for a really long time, this whole presentation is about how you want to either incorporate it or change it, what I would call reauthor it, into the identity that you want for yourself as a Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latina. There's like 17,000 words even for that. So throughout this presentation, I most likely will use the word Latinx. For me, in my academic writing, it's just the word that I use, and it just to me encompasses including everybody. That is an inclusive term, the way that I see it and the way that I use it in this presentation. So we're going to be covering three topics: history, what I call cultural concerns, and then identity formation in itself. So I have no idea why that popped up. I'm going to redo this. The keyboard got real sensitive right there. All right. So talking about our history, we're going to be talking about our indigenous civilizations, our ancestral lands, all the way to things like our collective trauma from colonialism, imperialism, and genocide and cultural dispossession, all the way to trying to heal through gaining independence for many of our Latin American nations, the dynamic cultural mixing of who we are as a people right now, and the beautiful and rich histories of being able to survive and thrive through all of this. So, historical context is so important to understanding parts of our identity, right? And so we're talking about pre-colonial, indigenous, and ancestral people, because all of us who have Latinx ancestry come from ancestry of indigenous people. That's who was on our lands, right? They're the unceded lands of indigenous people. And so much of that history is tainted by who wrote about it, who talked about it. Even now, here in the United States, using the context of African American history, you can see how it's being changed. The term that's being used is whitewashed. There are some people who are as bold as to say slavery was a good thing. Look at all the good things that came out of it for African American people. The audacity to have somebody say something like that. That same concept is seen about our history, right? We should be grateful that people came in and colonized and progressed and westernized or modernized our nations. We should be grateful that we had the opportunity to immigrate to the United States. And in all of this, there's a word that I use in grief work that's called disenfranchisement. There's a disenfranchised grief to losing out on what our indigenous and ancestral wisdom could give us, what our ancestral and indigenous people have passed down to us or wanted to have passed down to us. That concept of being disenfranchised means nobody is recognizing it, that we're supposed to just pretend like it didn't happen and pretty much starts after the colonizers and Christopher Columbus and the Spaniards came in and started to take over and conquer our countries. That's where history is supposed to start, according to many individuals. And in our textbooks, that's where history really starts. And what we're taught in our educational system, that is where history really starts. But we're missing this huge history of what we were before it. Now, the interesting part is that, as human beings, our bodies don't miss a beat. Our bodies contain not just literal DNA, but they contain, the essence of the histories from our past within us. And so there's so many individuals who have this current yearning and longing for understanding themselves better. Now, here's what I always found interesting as I was growing up. I came from a culture of when language acquisition was seen as if you spoke another language at home, it was going to hinder your ability to speak English in the schools. So when I was a kid, that's what my teachers told my parents. Stop teaching your kids Spanish. It's hurting their English language acquisition. And my parents didn't know any better. And in many cases, were taught not to challenge authority, right? What was seen as authority, especially in the school systems and whatnot. So they did what they were told and they stopped teaching us Spanish. Now, in that, I lost my ability to not only connect with my roots, but to actually physically connect with people in my family. My grandparents didn't speak English. My older aunts and uncles didn't speak English. I had many cousins who didn't speak English. Now I lost my ability to connect with them, to speak with them, right? So this whole like cutting off of our pre-colonial, indigenous, ancestral, and even, knowing that, Spanish came obviously from when we were colonized, but even that was more history that was being cut off from me and my ability to connect with my past. So it wasn't until I started to gain a love of history and, of course, my own advocacy and my own identity journey where I started to learn about the indigenous people from my island, the Taínos. I'm from Puerto Rico, and the Taínos were the indigenous people who are still there, but who lived on the land um, pre-colonial times. And so really important to understand that history, right? And tracing it back is not necessary. You don't need to swab your DNA and figure out which people you belong to. Just knowing like my people started on this land and starting to learn about who was there originally. Even getting those stories is one step closer to feeling connected, belonged, and beginning to form your identity with some historical context. Because what happened during colonialism then really changed the narrative of ourselves as a people. So there's this 500-year legacy of European and Anglo-American colonization starting in the 1500s. 500-year legacy of it. Colonization, enslavement, plundering of resources, land, theft, genocide, all sorts of things. Forced colonization, forced assimilation, forced migration, you know, and so what we see is this now embedded in our communities and in our history. Physical, sexual, spiritual, and intellectual violence, right? We weren't even allowed to have our own thoughts, our own voice, our own stories being told and passed down. Economic, social, medical, religious displacement, and eradication, forced assimilation and acculturation. And that's exactly what happened, to my family, right? Being forced to stop speaking Spanish because we were told it was hurting our English language acquisition. And then this idea of mestizaje, right? This, mixing of cultures and communities. And then there began to be a hierarchy of that, right? The more European blood that you had in you, you started to see social systems change because of that. And then eventually we started to see internalized racism start to impact our community. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So why why did all of this start to impact who we were and start to impact our identities and how we saw ourselves and our cultural beliefs? Well, much of the research tells us that adapting to or adopting dominating cultures, beliefs, and language, for example, is not just about, what we hear some people say, like you're selling out or you want to have proximity to whiteness, you know, being told that some people have better hair or that you're uplifting your race when you marry somebody who's white or more fair complected because your kids will then hopefully be more lighter or fair complected, even calling people in our communities by the color of their skin, having like a nickname about it, negro, negra, gringo, gringa. The idea of the no sabo kids, right? Seeing as like, you're not part of our community because you don't look a certain way, or you don't act a certain way, or you don't talk a certain way, versus having to adapt or adopt a dominant culture's beliefs and ideas because it's a survival mechanism. And part of our identity formation is recognizing when we're acting out of survival and how do we choose something different. Maybe we don't need to survive anymore. Maybe it's not a threat to start to inhabit some of our original ancestral indigenous pre-colonial based heritage, right? So we're going to keep that in mind as we're like talking about the history here. So now we see this colonial imprint in the modern era. So the US has been involved in wars, human rights violations, and regime changes since the 1800s, right? So from 1500 for the next few hundred years, you had Spain, Portugal, places like that, colonizing our Latin American lands. At some point, that changed, right? The Mexican American War, the Spanish American War in the 1800s. All of a sudden, now our land was then given to the United States. And so, since that time period, the United States has been the one being involved with identity formation, having an imprint on who we are as Latin American people. They have been involved in every single war that we've seen, from Guatemala to Honduras. And obviously, if you know the history of Puerto Rico, we are still a colonized nation. We are not an independent country. So to this day, in 2025, we are one of the oldest colonized nations in the world because we are a commonwealth of the United States. So when we talk about this being in the past or this being history, it's not history. It's present day identity formation as a result of colonialism. In the center of our identity formation is colonialism. There is this amazing concept that is really starting to have some traction in the world of understanding mental health and psyche of communities, collective communities. And it's called the chingada complex. It's the idea of the raping or the conquest of a nation. Now, when I grew up, and I grew up with a bunch of Mexican friends, they'd always be using this word, hijo de la chingada, chinga tu madre. I mean, I've heard it, I've heard all those forms of those things. And I guess I basically understood the context of it. But it wasn't until I started to learn about the chingada complex where I started to understand the root and the history of that word. So the idea of the chingada complex is that modern day Mexican people are hijos de la chingada. They are children of the conquest and internal colonialism, and that it has an actual impact on the psyche and the collective thought processes and the behaviors and the feelings of the entire Mexican American people. It literally changes and imprints on them to be from a nation that was colonized. And I'm going to let that sit in for a minute. It was really difficult to hear that. And when I read about this stuff, I feel it in my body. It's painful that this is such a huge part of our identity formation. And I say our because even though this research stems from the Mexican and Mexican American population, I believe it to be true around all Latin American populations. And I actually started to ask various clients who are really closely tied with their country of origins if they had a word in their community that started to express some of this, that they are people from a history of being colonized, of being a forced assimilated, of being dominated by another culture. And there were some words that have started to come out, and it's created some really interesting dialogue between my clients and I about their identity formation. And that's when this started to become really interesting and personal to me. So, how do we see that imprinted in us? Well, um, just look at stereotypes about Latinos. Look at news and media messages about Latinos. Look at socialized messages about Latinos. Look at what our educational textbooks say about Latinos and Latin American history. And listen to conversations, whether it's with friends or family at the dinner table in neighborhoods. There are pieces of the imprint of colonization in every single one of those. There's this wonderful African proverb that states, until the lions have their own historians, tales of hunting will always glorify the hunter. And what this means is we have been the lions. Our worlds have been taken over by the hunters. And as a result, our true stories are being told from a totally different perspective, and they're no longer ours. So we're creating our identity off of narratives and storylines that weren't even ours. In one of the other presentations that I've done for ILSEF and in other organizations, I've talked about the idea of using narrative therapy to reshape the narrative around this, right? And I was looking for images to go along with this, and I saw this image of a person working with clay to create something, extraordinary. And that's how I see the idea of reshaping our narrative. It's like, you're working with something that was originally in one state, and then you add water to it and you start to use your hands and you get into it and you're kneading the work, and all of a sudden you start to create something that's more uniquely you, more authentically you. And that's the idea of using narrative and storylines. Our ancestors, that's how they told our stories. That's how we passed down our wisdom. We told stories. There's even a whole therapy around it. It's called cuento therapy, using our own folkloric, historic ancestral stories to start to learn more about ourselves, to start to understand ourselves a little bit better, to start to identify the way that we want to identify. So I love this idea of reshaping, and that's how I want you to think about this. There's a wonderful affirmationist. Her name is Louise Hayes, and she says, you have to see the dirt in order to clean your house. And our history for those 500 plus year legacy is a big pile of dirt that if we don't acknowledge it and we don't understand how it impacts us, then we can't properly clean our house. So how do we challenge this? How do we disrupt, the impact and the our identity formation that was impacted by this legacy of colonization? Well, one, We have to start recognizing when stereotypes are being used, and we have to start challenging them. So there's this wonderful clip that I saw on Instagram, and Latinos were being interviewed. And the question they were asked was, what's a Latino stereotype that you'd like to get rid of?
Just don't.
Can you hear it? Is the volume good? Somebody give me a thumbs up so I know.
We can hear.
Okay, perfect.
Piss us off, and then we won't be toxicas. Would I get canceled if I say the one that we work too hard? I'm tired of people thinking that we all work hard. That's not true. I do not try at my job.
People thinking that Hispanic or Mexican people are lazy. How are you about to call someone lazy and then be afraid that they're taking your job?
That men can't take care of their own kids because they can, and it's not our job as women. Doesn't matter who you are.
Oh man, no, I'm tired of the TV shows. Just TV shows, they represent us bad. With the Spanglish, that's what I hate too. They suck so bad with that.
Overtly like masculinity, having to perform it, not being able to like fully express all the ranges of your own dynamic.
That we all like chile. I don't like chile. I think it's too spicy for me. I can't handle that.
Well, it's that they're always late, but it's unfortunate that it's kind of true. Yeah, I guess that one's deserved, but it's my least favorite.
We all just love soccer. I work in marketing, so they say like Latinos love food, they love their family, and they love soccer. We're so much more than that. Like, please do your research.
Family. I love my family, and my family, I think, influences a lot of what I do. There are a lot of situations and a lot of cases where people's families are either not supportive. It erases from the fact that we are an individual and that we choose our own life. We need space and we need some time away, and oftentimes for a lot of people it is their chosen family.
Love that so much. So begin to challenge the stereotypes. And whether you do it just for yourself or you actually start to do it out loud. You know, one of the questions that was asked, Juan Carlos and Ilsef sent out do you have any questions for this presentation? And somebody says, what small everyday things can we do to make a difference, even if we're not activists or in politics, just as people who care? This is it. When you hear somebody retelling a stereotype about us, when you hear them sharing something that just isn't true, or that perpetuates a false narrative, or, as I use the African proverb, the story of glorifying the hunter, we need people to push back against that. News and media messages. I mean, it's so consuming right now to listen to all this news and media. It's so harmful to our psyche, not just because of all the horrible things that are happening, particularly to our community, as we seem to be like, target enemy number one right now. But in general, there's just such negativity, such hateful rhetoric about immigrants, about Latinos, about the state of the world right now. And again, how do we push back against that? How do we look for stories and uplift stories that show different sides of our community? The other day, there was this wonderful story that I read about these cyclists who have decided to use, keep exercising as they're riding their bikes around town, but now they're going and they're buying out vendors, food vendors, tamale stands and other stands, so that that person can go home and be safe, but at least have the money from the food that they sold, and then they go give it to people who are in need. That's our community. The hundreds and thousands of people who are showing up, who are advocating, the children who left their high school the other day to protest and stand up and make a point to protect themselves and their families. Those are the stories we need to be uplifting. I had another question where somebody asked, how can Latino people thrive in white dominant spaces? How do we navigate imposter syndrome or feeling like we have to prove ourselves? We have to push back against that. What makes us less than, what makes us feel inferior is those historical narratives. because somewhere along the line, somebody told us we were less than. We should be lucky to just have what we have. We have to push back and challenge these narratives in every space that we can, every space that we feel safe in that we can, right? I'm not advocating to do something that's going to threaten you or put you in an unsafe space, but in those spaces where you can, then do. Socialized messages. We harm ourselves in saying really harmful things about ourselves, in creating nicknames that are related to the size of someone's weight or the skin color or the type of hair that they have. Those are socialized messages. As a mental health therapist and somebody who constantly works with understanding how the brain works and how that impacts us, one thing I'm always teaching my clients is that we as people are good observers. We see everything, but we're terrible interpreters. We intake information and we internalize it as messages. So the other day, for example, I went and I was asked to present on this panel. And after the panel, I had like 4 or 5 people come up to me and tell me, "You're such an eloquent speaker." And it almost seemed like they were surprised about it. And all of a sudden, my brain interpreted that as a message of like, was that like a backhanded compliment? And I had to start checking that and challenging it. And I even called a few of my friends and I said, "Let me tell you this experience that I have. How do you take that?" Because as human beings, that's how we interpret information. We turn it into a message and then we internalize that message. So if we're perpetuating some really harmful messages, intentionally or not, it's going to come back to harm us. One of the messages that I hear all the time from my clients is this is the message that they're internalizing, that they're not enough, that nothing they ever do is enough. And I'm hearing this from my clients who are doctors, who are lawyers, who have advanced degrees, who are in systems and in spaces that they've had to really hustle to get into and prove their worth to get into, and it's still not enough. Where did those messages come from? 9 times out of 10, nobody actually ever said you're not enough, but they said other things that then got interpreted as they're not enough. We do a lot of in our community, like keep going. I've done a whole presentation around all the words, échale ganas, and ponte las pilas, all these words and phrases that we have as Latinos that are about keep working, work hard, keep going, keep going. Think about the message that puts into somebody, that as they are and as they stand, they're not enough. That starts to form someone's identity. Our educational textbooks, majority of them are straight garbage. They are told from the hunter's perspective. They glorify the hunter. They glorify the colonization. And we are lucky to be in a state, those who are in Illinois are lucky to be in a state of Illinois that at least tries to continue to have classes on Latin American history and African American and Black history, right? We're not like other states that are even banning classes like that. And still, our education, we have to push back against it. Who wrote those textbooks? Who's telling those stories? I give my kids their own history lessons. I buy books from my people that actually teach our history from our voices. We need to do that more. The other day I was presenting and I talked about the fact that, I grew up a really diverse area. So yeah, lots of Latinos, lots of other immigrant groups. And one of the other big immigrant groups, right, because we're from Chicago, one of the largest immigrant groups is the Polish group. And I remember the Polish kids had school on the weekend. Every weekend they went to Polish school. Every weekend they went to Polish school from the time they started school until the time they graduated high school. And then they would receive this certificate of being biliterate, bicultural, bilingual, and really having a full understanding of Polish history, language, literature. It was a beautiful thing for those Polish kids. And I always wondered, where was ours? Are we teaching that to our own people? Why was it okay for them to feel proud of their culture and their history, so much so that they put their kids in weekly classes about it? Always something that I thought about. And then conversations, right? Conversations. All I hear on these news cycles is about, what percentage of Latinos voted for this current administration and essentially voted for what they're doing right now, which is harming their own communities. And now I have an issue with the way that they get their statistics about who voted for who or whatnot. But these conversations are really important to have. There's so much divisiveness, even amongst us as Latinos. For years, in one of the jobs that I had people who every Cinco de Mayo wished me a happy Cinco de Mayo. They could care less that I was Puerto Rican. They thought I was Mexican, right? Even though I explained to them that there was a difference. I didn't care though. That kind of stuff never bothered me. I'd say happy Cinco de Mayo right back to you. People would ask me for recipes for enchiladas. I would just print one off on Google and then give them a recipe, right? Like, I don't care. I loved being mixed with my fellow brothers and sisters from the Latino community. I always say that we're family. I'm proud to be part of this history. That's not the case for everyone. There's a lot of divisiveness between this Latino group and that Latino group and this Latino group and that Latino group. And again, these are conversations that people are hearing at the dinner table with their relatives, at holiday time with families and friends. We have to be brave enough to push back against these conversations. This divisiveness caused, right, at the center of everything is this colonization, finding a hierarchy so somebody can feel more superior than somebody else on this chain. We have to push back against this because we're harming ourselves from the inside out. And it starts to impact the way that we form our identities and where we think we belong and where we don't. So, in taking into consideration this history now, I want to show you how that embeds in what we modernly call our culture, okay? I have plenty of clients who will, as we're talking about some concern they have, will stick in, well, you know how Mexican families how, well, you know how the Ecuadorian people are, well, you know how Puerto Ricans are. And I always say, no, I don't. And then I have to have a conversation about that. But think about how common that is. I'm sure you may have said it, or at least you hear people say it. Well, you know how this group is. This is how cultural concerns start to happen. So I'm going to repeat this again. At the center of, a big part of our identity formation is, whether we recognize it or not, this idea of what happened to us during this 500+ year legacy of colonization. Racism, oppression, marginalization, physical and mental health being impacted, intergenerational trauma. And so we've got all of this under what I call historical trauma. And coming from that historical trauma, we do have some healthy coping mechanisms, what we call cultural buffers. Okay, talk about that in a minute. But at the same time, we also have some really unhealthy coping mechanisms, and they then turn into looking like cultural characteristics. So, historical trauma laid the foundation for these characteristics and identity formation, okay? They're influential, but they're not deterministic. If you know something about, the history of psychology and psychoanalyzing, mental health therapy, this, Freud is a big name in the industry. And Freud believed that people are who they are based on their past. That idea is called determinism. Like, you can't change who you are. These things happen to you, now it's going to determine who you are. I don't believe in that. Many people don't believe in that. We believe in things influencing us, but not determining who we are. As human beings, I believe we have the capacity to change. There are some things that may be needed for that to happen, but I have to believe in the human being ability to change. We can be influenced, but that doesn't mean it turns out to be who we are, right? It's not all doom and gloom. So what are some of our cultural buffers? Well, we also call them protective factors. Ethnic pride, cultural identity, even the idea of familismo, right? Like being connected to your family, spirituality, religiosity, resistance. These have, according to a research, these have been found to be really strong cultural buffers. They're there to mitigate, to minimize the issues from our historical past, from our historical trauma. On the flip side of that, right, from this historical trauma, we see coping mechanisms, survival mechanisms, if you will. Remember how I talked about sometimes you need to adopt the dominant culture's way of being in order to survive. So they're not all healthy, but sometimes they're based on survival. And so we see things in our community like poverty, lower educational attainment, underemployment, unhealthy coping mechanisms. So things like alcohol and drug use, racism, discrimination. So those are things that are characteristics that stem from historical trauma and then start to form our identity as a result of it. Now, the great thing about cultural buffers is that we have a lot of them. There's this wonderful study done back in 2020 that showed what are our forms as Latino people, what are our forms of cultural capital, our resource, our wealth, right? That comes from our history, our ancestral people, and beyond. So things like we are aspirational, we are linguistic, we are social, we are navigational, we are familial, we are resistant, we are perseverant. And many people see spirituality and faith as a form of strength and cultural capital, right? So we've got wonderful cultural buffers. The problem is that there are consequences to having continuous micro and macro aggressions and insults occurring to our group of people. I call it death by 1,000 cuts. So we can have all these wonderful cultural buffers that help to strengthen us, that help to give us self and community resourcing. But when we have the impact, the persistent, continual impact of racism, oppression, discrimination, colonization, when those continue to hit us one by one by one in a continual fashion, just turn on the news and you can hear all the negativity about our people in our country, right? Think about at the highest level, our community is being called hellholes. I remember when Puerto Rico was called a floating pile of garbage. These are the deaths by 1,000 cuts. These are the micro and macro insults that we have to deal with on a regular basis. They chip away at our cultural buffers. They erode them to a point where we no longer can use them to uplift ourselves. The erasure of our ancestors, of our history, of our teaching, it erodes our ability to be resilient all the time. The ongoing inequalities, the destruction of our cultural practices, it erodes our ability to overcome and continue to be resistant and perseverance over time. Resmaa Menakem, if you've never read anything by him, I highly suggest it. He's a social worker who specializes in racialized trauma and the impact of racialized trauma on a collective people. And this is how he expressed it, which I absolutely love, and it makes total sense. He says that time decontextualizes trauma, which means trauma in a person can look like a personality trait over time. Trauma in a family can look like a family trait over time, and trauma in a community can look like a cultural trait over time. So then we begin to pathologize culture, which means that we see culture as the problem. Oh, it's because you're from X, Y, and Z that you behave this way, that you think this way, that you feel this way. And that's what's problematic. So think about in your own mind examples of this, where you might say, or you might hear somebody say, well, that's just who I am. Now, when I hear one of my clients say this, I have to challenge that by saying, actually, what you're saying is not a genetic trait. There's no DNA for that. It's not actually who you are. It's what happened to you. Well, that's just how my family is. There's no genetic trait for that. It's what happened to them that then they had to adapt. Well, that's just the way our community is. No genetic trait for that. So instead of being enmeshed with this historical formation of our identity that has us believing that we can't break these patterns, that we can't change because it's just who we are as a people, we begin to see the necessity to unblend ourselves. I can take pieces of my ancestry that make me strong and whole, and I can start to leave those pieces that don't. I can unmesh and unblend myself from these things. And that's the beauty of reshaping and reauthoring your narrative and reshaping your identity to show up in spaces that you want to be authentically you. You know, he also says, here's how you can tell that a community has been impacted by this. Genocide, land theft, imperialism, colonialism. Yep, that's happened to us in every Latin American country. Root shock, the idea of psychological distress from displacement. Yep, that forced assimilation, forced migration that's happened in all of our Latin American countries. Yep, we're experiencing that as well. The idea of colorism, which is internalized racism. Yep, and I have some statistics to talk about that, but that fully impacts us as the Latino community. The differences that we see because of the color of our skin. And that we see high levels of PTSD, which, for the medical diagnosis means post-traumatic stress disorder. But Resmaa Menakem always talks about it being more of persistent traumatic stress disorder, because that idea of post means it has passed. It is something that happened in the past. But what happening to our people is persistent, it's ongoing, and it's still happening. So I prefer to use that term to recognize that dirt in my house. I have to recognize it in order to clean it, in order to do something about it. Guarnier says that the sign of ultimate oppression working is when the oppressor can take away his hands, stand back and say, look at what they're doing to themselves. Think about how that impacts our community. Look at what they're doing to themselves. So in our community, we see the highest rates of depression than any other racial ethnic group. In our community, we see suicide as the second leading cause of death among us aged 25 to 34. In our community, since 1991, we have seen high rates of Latinas aged 10 to 24 attempt suicide. In our community, we've seen more than half of Hispanics say that having lighter skin helps to get ahead in the USA. In our community, we've seen more than half of Latinos say that skin color shapes their daily experiences. And in our community, we have seen the impacts of us having survivor's guilt, disenfranchised grief, as I talked about earlier, internalization of ancestral suffering, internalized oppression and colonization, somatization, and numbing. So let me explain some of these. In survivor's guilt, I hear a lot of storylines around, particularly with my Latino clients that were undocumented, then got DACA, and then were able to get citizenship status. How they have survivor's guilt. Why me? And they feel awful about their identity of being able to be a citizen now. And they feel like they have no right to say anything about what their experience was like for all that time that they were undocumented or had DACA. Survivor's guilt. So many immigrants who migrated here to the United States and had to leave their country of origin, feeling guilty that they're here while many of their family members and friends and communities are suffering in their country of origin still. So many Latinos feel this, all these experiences through somatization, which is like feeling it in your body and then having a physical response to, stress, a physical response to suffering, a physical response to grieving. So I'll give you a perfect example of something that happened to my daughter last night. So she was really upset about something. I don't know how it got escalated. I only got to the tail end of the conversation. And she got so upset that she began to get a headache and then threw up. And as I cleaned her up and I put her in a hot bath, and while she was in that hot bath, I talked to her and I said, I actually understand this because that's what happens to me. I get so upset that my body reacts. And I want you to think about your own stories, or maybe, hearing friends and families talk about how, the headache, the stomach aches, the tight chest, the sweating, the rapid heartbeat, how those tend to come out as symptoms first before saying that there's actually something wrong, like anxiety or depression or panic. Their body tells them first. This is what happens for many Latinos. And then to avoid feeling, the coping mechanism then may be to numb. I would rather not want to feel anything. So how do we see this again playing out in identity formation in another way? Well, there's a really wonderful article done about archetypes, primary archetypes in the Latinx community. So we've got people who want to feel like they fit into a certain bucket, all right? So this one bucket is white passing, upper and upper middle class socioeconomic status in their country of origin, families who have come to the US to work at white collar companies or work or study at elite universities, families who fled one of the many leftist regimes from Latin America, and so maybe they were able to get political asylum or something to that effect, right? So many individuals are in this bucket, this archetype. Then you have this other bucket, and it is the more BIPOC Latinx person, right? Darker skin complected, lower socioeconomic backgrounds, families that were fleeing from persecution or violence or lack of economic opportunity in their countries of origin. So their story, very different. Their lives in their Latin American country of origin, very different. And so many Latinos are asked to pick a bucket. Which one are you a part of? And then there's this third bucket that feels like they're caught in the middle. They don't belong on either side. And this is also very generational. They feel they don't belong anywhere. I'm not Latino enough. I'm not American enough. I'm not, from this family that came from economic status in Latin America. I'm undocumented. I came here with documentation. But everybody's being asked to pick their bucket. So again, identity formation. Who are you? Pick a bucket. Now, of course, because I work with predominantly Latino clients, that I hear a lot of, oh, well, this is how Latinos are. This is how Latinos are. And I constantly am challenging that false narrative. So just the other day, I read this story, and it came from Ming-Na Wen, who is this famous Asian American actress. She voiced for Mulan in the Disney movie. She's in like the Marvel cinematic movie world, like famous actress. And the other day she posted, "When my mother can still trigger me with insults when I show her something I've achieved. Yep, this is a reminder why I became an actor. Thank you to my many fans for the love and support." And look at the title of the article. People are sharing their experiences with toxic cultural expectations after Ming-Na Wen revealed her 90-year-old mom still insults her when she shares her achievements. And so this is another reason why I have to push back against those stereotypes. This is not a cultural thing. This is a history of trauma on a collective people. I always say this in my presentations when I talk about historical trauma. If you don't heal what hurt you, you'll bleed on people who didn't cut you. And this is why identity formation is so significant, because if we're enmeshed with an identity that does harm us, then we're going to continue to harm ourselves and bleed on people who didn't cut us. So, how do you block out the unnecessary noise around you to listen to yourself? I found this image online and I loved it, right? Because even though there's noise going on around her, she just looks so peaceful. And that's where we get to reshaping our identity formation for us. I once had a client who told me this: "My life feels borrowed." And hearing that started to really pique my interest in identity formation. Now, this was about 2 years ago. And that's when I really started to recognize the impact of identity formation based on our history and our present day, all the way to our present day experiences. Steve Jobs said in a 2005 commencement speech, I believe he was talking to a bunch of graduates from Stanford. He said, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." And so here's one thing that I offer to you all is recognizing that you are more than just one part of your identity, more than just one part. So here's me. It's a picture of me. And just quickly, just to show you how to do this, I started to make all these little bubbles of all various parts of my identity. I swear, I just spent a minute doing this. And even in a minute of me doing this, I got a whole lot of bubbles, but that's not all me. There are still plenty of more parts if I gave myself a little bit more time to do this. It is so important to encourage people to see all parts of themselves, all parts that make them them. And it's really easy. You put your, get out a piece of paper, you put yourself in the center of that paper, and you start to make a whole bunch of bubbles around you, writing in each bubble one part of your identity. And you can spend time adding to this. And you can spend time reflecting on how much energy you're giving to each part. Are there parts that you've been neglecting lately that maybe you want to give a little bit more energy to? Are there parts of you that are kind of dormant? Like, yeah, that used to be a part of me, used to take a lot more energy. It doesn't anymore, but I still want to keep it as a part of me. That's okay too. But so important to recognize you're more than just one identity, more than just one part. This second piece I'm going to share with you about identity formation, I call it intrusive love. Now, whenever I can get my act together, I somehow want to start talking more about this. Like, let's just say if I ever had a podcast, I got you, Jesus, in 1 minute. If I ever had a podcast, I would call it intrusive love. I said it here today. This is being recorded. So, just know I'm putting it into the world. I'm manifesting it. It's going to happen one day. But it's this idea that I got from my relationship with my mother. I was recently diagnosed with a food-related disease. And it really blew my world up because food is such an important piece to me. It's my history. It's how I remember my grandmother and her story. She taught me how to cook. So when I cook, I think of her, and I love it. It's therapy for me. But when I no longer could eat certain things, I had to tell my family I needed support. And so I told my parents, and my mom, who does all the cooking, traditional Latina, who does all the cooking, she changed the whole way she cooked for me. Now, my mom very much like the the actor Wen's mom. I could tell her an achievement, and there will be criticism that will come with it. So I started to form this concept, and I found this like on it's a social media trend. This idea of like looking for milk at Home Depot. A lot of therapists use this term. I know what I can go to my mom for. If I'm looking for milk, I certainly can't go to Home Depot. But so many times we're looking particularly to our family members, to give us things that maybe they just can't give us. And that's where we must find it in other parts, either in parts of ourselves or parts of our history or other relationships. What my mom may not be able to give me in terms of emotional support, she can give me in, I will change the entire way I've been cooking for all my life to support you. It's intrusive love. It's not love in the traditional form of what movies teach us about how healthy attachments are formed and how we should be able to get everything from the people that we love and that are supposed to love us. That's not life. It's not reality. Experiences happened that shape everybody. So we just need to recognize that. And if we go to Home Depot, we have to know what Home Depot can offer us. And if I need milk, I need to be able to go to another store to get the milk I need. So I'm going to stop right here for a second. Jesus, I want to give you my undivided attention, so I took off the screen.
Thank you. Thank you for putting this together. Just a quick question, take on it. You know, in terms of the cultural part, we live in different spaces. You know, we live at home, we live at work, and so the you know, the code switching happens a lot,
Yes,
especially in our Latino culture, right? So, like, how do you tackle that part? You know, like, you need to know who you are, but also the expectations of the outside world, of the places where you work, where you have friends, right? So how do you deal with code switching in a sort of internal life level?
so I kind of see code switching similarly to this, my concept of intrusive love. You just have to know what you're getting and what you're not getting in those spaces. And you have to feel like it's congruent with you, with who you are. So values are very important to us. Like, you know, I can say that the research says that, which it does, but I think anecdotally, I can tell that values are very important to us, who we are as a people. And so what happens is when our values are being challenged in spaces where we may need to code switch, it doesn't feel good. And it has an impact on our identity. And it may start to put us in crisis, a state of crisis with our identity. That's when you have to recognize, what are you going to do? Are you going to continue to live incongruently in those spaces? Or are you going to do something different? The example I always use with this is, Colin Kaepernick, when he decided to kneel and not stand for the national anthem, and all the flack he took. I mean, the horrible things that were said about him, all the way to eventually not being hired, even though he was one of the best quarterbacks during the time in the NFL. But he chose, he knew this was going to have repercussions, but he chose that he couldn't live incongruently from his values. He couldn't. And never played football again at the end of his life. For each of us, we have to make those decisions about living congruently with our values and the impact of living incongruently, how much we can live with that, how much we can tolerate, how much capacity we have for it. So in spaces of higher education and mental health, there are not a lot of us. And in those spaces, when I was navigating those spaces, I started to recognize the impact that it had on my identity. things like being told like to wait my turn, or that I'm pushing too hard, or that I have to play by somebody else's rules to get what I want. I don't play nicely to those things. I never have. I always say it's my ancestors who weren't able to have a voice, and so they gave me one. And so I eventually got to the point where I could no longer be in those spaces, and I had to create my own space. Now, there's definitely a lot of privilege in my ability to do that with my education and, other privileged identities that I have, but I had to create my own space. And so that is definitely an independent, individual decision that we will have to make, as these spaces were not built for us. They were not built for us. Jesus, did I get to the heart of your question?
Yeah, no, I mean, it answers. I think, the sort of the underlying thing is that it has social and economic consequences for our people, right? So,
That is accurate.
I'm like you. I'm a privileged social worker from University of Chicago, right? So, like, and one thing which you were talking about, Cardnex. I mean, one thing that kind of is interesting is how when a baseball player or a Latino becomes successful, they tend to marry out of the culture, right? And it's very interesting because it's not the other part I struggle personally is not use the outside culture, but it's all my own culture. What are the things that I'm willing to retain about my traditions and cultures, and which ones I'm willing to give, and the feeling of not being accepted by my own culture because I'm too educated to whatever, right? So it's and also being an undocumented DACA recipient, so it's a cultural identity that 1.5 as sociologists called us, the 1.5 generation, the Latinidad, it's on our daily lives. And it's really interesting to me because, again, I feel like I struggle more with my own people than with the outsiders, because I also work in the predominantly white spaces and have gotten used to, like, one little example, right? In white spaces, I can question as much as I can, as much as I want. In Latino culture, you have that idea of titles or responsibility. So when you ask a question, even if it comes from a good place, they see you as an agitator. They see you as someone that doesn't respect authority. And it's something I struggle with all the time.
Yes. And I mean, even in what you were saying there, right, in Latino culture, and again, it's challenging the notion of that being a cultural characteristic of ours. Because in fact, the cultural characteristic of ours is resistance. And by pushing back and challenging, that's what we're doing. We're actually honoring what is, in fact, a cultural characteristic and a strength of ours. But it's shifting the narrative of that. It's shifting the narrative that we all have to do our part to do it. And it will come with ruptured relationships, 100%. Because some people are still going to choose to live in the status quo because it's safer for them to do it. Or they're living in that survival mode. And I'm not here to tell anybody to disrupt that. But I know for me, and what I try to support in identity formation with my clients in the communities I serve, is to see a healthier view of themselves. And we will find community to enrich and support us in that healthier version of ourselves. And then that will become our new narrative. but we have to start from somewhere, right? So, and that's where this idea of looking for milk at Home Depot. And Jesus, you're absolutely right. Zora Neale Hurston said, she's a writer and activist. She said, not all skin folk are kinfolk. Okay. So just because I'm Latino and you're Latino, that doesn't mean I found a home. Our home, our safety, where we thrive could come from anywhere. At the bottom line, though, is I do choose to support my people and help my people heal. And I will keep fighting for that. That's something for me I won't give up on, right? So if we, though, look in spaces that aren't going to give us what we need, what we're going to continue to see are things like burnout and frustration and hopelessness and not feeling heard and not feeling belonged and not feeling connected. And also what many of us in our community suffer from, which is hyper independence. Fine, they don't want to help me. I'll do it myself. I'll take it on myself. I'll do it. I'll do it. Never mind. I'll do it. I'll take it. I'll take it. And then this is just a vicious cycle. So really important to remember, our people can give us different things. And it may not be exactly what we're looking for, but you have to just know and be more aware of what they can give us. And I'll go to them for that. But if I'm looking for something else, I got to figure out that space that's going to give me that other thing that I need. Instead of falling in this very tumultuous cycle that's not going to get us anywhere. So in the business world, there's this acronym called SWOT, and I see it being very useful in identity formation as well. So thinking about yourself in terms of strengths, what are you doing well? You know, what sets you apart, right? You don't fit into the stereotype. That's okay. What sets you apart? What are your good qualities? Sometimes we forget to look for goodness, intentionally look for goodness in ourselves. That's a strength. And then what forms of cultural capital do you already use? This isn't all of us. This is what our ancestors did pass down. And if there's something on here that you're like, ooh, I could use a little lifting up in, then go after it. That will come in the O part, and I'll get to that. In terms of weaknesses, I never see ourselves as having weaknesses when it comes to our culture, because it's not about a cultural thing. I see weaknesses in the system around supporting us as a cultural group. So for the system, there are weaknesses. So where do you see changes need to occur in order to improve the ecosystem? Where do you see changes need to occur? This is why, as a therapist and as an advocate, I go beyond just the clients that I'm supporting. I do community spaces like this. I go to churches. I go to mosques. I go to community centers. I go to schools because I see that those ecosystems need changing, and I can do something about it with the skills that I have. Do you think the resources for you to support you and your culture are adequate? If not, how are you going to advocate for them? One of the questions that I got was, this has been Hispanic Heritage Month. How do you emphasize and honor identity beyond a month? This is how. Where do you see that you're not being honored throughout the year? We should be honored throughout the year. That's one of our protective factors, is honoring our ethnic identity, our cultural heritage. That can't just happen for 30 days. That needs to happen every day. How can we start to embed more of that in our ecosystems? And that includes our schools, our jobs, our communities. How can you remove the noise around you so that you can really listen to yourself? Remove the noise around you. Now, when it comes to our opportunities, right? What opportunities, and what are your goals for yourself? Do you want to learn more about your ancestral heritage? Do you want to learn more stories from your family? And it doesn't have to be just your family. Remember, if we start to think about ourselves as a collective people, I can take ancestral stories from Mexico, from Peru, from Nicaragua, and I can say, yeah, those are my people too. And I can use that to uplift and enrich myself because I feel connected to all of that. What opportunities do you want yourself to take? What do you still need to learn? We should be thinking about how we always need to learn and grow. That's how we change the narrative. That we're not stuck in status quo. We're not stuck with a storyline that somebody else told us we should be like that. And that starts personally. You have to have a goal for yourself to learn and grow more. And then recognizing where are your threats in the system, okay? So what are the blockers that you're facing? What are the factors that are outside of your control? How many times do we put energy into things that are out of our control? One of the tools that I teach my clients is called Palm of Control, where I literally have them draw their hand, and on the inside of their hand, I have them start to write down what is in their control. Because more of our energy needs to be directed into that. And you also need to realize when something does trigger you, right? Like in that text about the actress that I showed you. She says, when my mom still triggers me at the ripe old age of, I think she's like 60 or something like that, right? You have to learn what triggers you. What could the trigger then turn into a crisis? We don't need to be going into levels of threat and feeling unsafe. That constant feeling of threat and not being safe impacts our identity formation. It turns into characteristics that are very unhealthy for us. So we need to start to be aware of them so we can do something about them. I'm a huge proponent of reading from the voices of our own people. So I have this beautiful list of books. These are all the ones that I've read. I haven't even put on there all the ones, but I love these absolutely so much. I've learned so much from each one of them. And then this gentleman who was at one of my presentations, he created this resource library. And so I'm giving you, he gave me permission to it's free, and he just created this Google site that's all about Latinx culture, videos, documentaries, films. Love it. I love it all. Feed yourself with this. Erik Erikson, who was a German psychosocial psychotherapist, he really founded and researched the development of identity development, right? Psychosocial development and identity development. And he said that it's a major life task that happens from adolescence as you transition into adulthood. And so there was this amazing study done back in 2017 that looked at personal identity development in the Hispanic immigrant community of adolescents. And what they found was that biological, cognitive, and social changes in early adolescence will prompt youth to consider who they are, what and whom they identify with, and what they think of themselves and what they want to do with their lives. Okay? Early on, starting in adolescence. And here's what they found of this Hispanic immigrant group. They found that those who had a higher baseline, which means they started higher in coherence of identity, which means they had a strong understanding of who they were, a strong identity formation, a positive, healthy identity formation of themselves. They had higher levels of self-esteem, higher levels of optimism, and higher levels of pro-social behaviors. Then they had this other group that started with higher levels of identity confusion, which means they didn't have a strong understanding of their identity. They had some kind of identity crises, if you will. And those who started off with that had lower self-esteem, greater depressive symptoms, more aggressive behavior, and more rule-breaking behavior, which makes total sense. Because if you don't know who you are and you don't have a strong foundation of your identity and your connection to your identity, then you're going to start to externalize that in ways that are very unhealthy. That's the idea of an identity crisis. You have to know where you come from to know where you are going. I don't know who said that, but they are so true. So true. And that was perfect timing, 1:30. All right, thank you so much. There was so much information given out. Please take my contact information, contact me. I'm willing to stick around for a couple minutes if anybody else has other questions that they want to ask, but I just really wanted to thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Dr. Pamela. This is Diane Casas.
Hi.
I know I'm got my screen closed.
You're totally fine. Don't even worry about it.
I was looking forward to this lunch and learn. I appreciate you. Thank you for your insight. I am just blown away, and I just love your presentation. So I just wanted to say thank you, and to
Thank you
Elsa,
so much.
to Elsef as well for putting these together so conveniently online that I can work and listen at the
Yes.
same time.
Yes.
Multitask. So I just applaud you for just being who you are, and thank you again for serving our community. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you so much. So meaningful. I appreciate that.
Yes, thank you.
Hola, Doctora Fullerton. My name is Danny Cortez. I just wanted to introduce myself. I actually just got this new position at Northeastern, so I'm the Associate Director of Latinx Student Engagement. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is partner up with as much as individuals that I can so that we can have our students come in and learn about what's going on in the world, but also have leaders and showcase and really put themselves out there so then that way our students can understand what's going on. And I truly believe that this topic is something that our students need to learn. So just wanted to let you know that I'll be contacting you so that we can figure out a date and all that fun stuff, because I would love to start doing partnerships. And honestly, lo que dijiste es algo que me encantó mucho. I can relate to from beginning to end. And as a queer individual, like I can only imagine the struggles también que está pasando con nuestros estudiantes. And then also like when you were talking about the toxic culture, my parents, I love my parents, but they call it tough love. And I'm just like, this is not tough love at all. Pero dicen que lo hacen con amor y cariño, que porque así nacieron ellos y que así fueron los grandparents. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but this is not how I see it. It hurts. I don't like it when you be calling especially like for an example, cuando están llamando gorda, gordo, moreno, blanco, and you know, they just give these nicknames, and I'm just like, why do we have these nicknames? Like, I don't get it.
But you know why now, right?
I know why.
Now you know why, exactly where it comes from. Yes.
And so
I love it.
It's something definitely that I would love to continue the conversation, but I know our students will actually be engaged with this. So thank you so much for sharing this. And I definitely, you're going to hear from me soon.
I love it. I love it. Reach out. Yes, I'm here. And, you know, Northeastern, not only do I teach there, but I also am an alum from Northeastern. So.
And we're looking for those alums and those teachers to like really like push themselves and share with this. So I'm excited. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, that is wonderful. That is just wonderful. Yeah, thank you for those comments. Yeah, that makes it really inspiring. And Dr. Fullerton, thank you so much for what an informative, healing, because it's a really healing presentation and inspiring and empowering. Thank you so much for everything as always. You know, you did an amazing job, and you always leave me inspired. Like, you know, with like you said, you know, the presentation with everything that's going on right now. I feel empowered, like you, ayudó muchísimo, to make me feel better and to know that there's hope and that, putting all this together is going to help us heal ourselves and our community. So thank you so much from the bottom of our heart. Thank you so much for your passion and commitment to advocacy and mental health. You truly inspire us all. And, your presentation style is just amazing. Yeah. And, you're motivating others. And I know you're going to motivate a lot of people here to continue learning about this and coming to future presentations, right? That you're going to do with us with
Maybe.
no, not maybe. So thank you.
Self-preservation is important for us,
Right,
right?
that's right. Well, it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be every day. It could be like every other month. Right. So thank you so much for everything. I don't know if there's any questions, but maybe we can ask them a little bit. But I also want to thank everyone who joined us. Your presence and engagement made this cafecito so very special. The presentation recording and the slides will be shared with you right after the presentation. And I just want to say that we also hope to see you in our future cafecitos. And please try and stay connected to with the foundation to learn more about our upcoming events. And make sure that you follow us on social media. But I don't know if you want to add anything else, Dr. Fullerton, or anybody else. Any other questions?
Can
One
I
thing
say
do wanna
something, Tim?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I wanted to say thank you for acknowledging the micro and macroaggressions. When I was working in NEIU, I had a faculty member that approached me and said, "You're not like the other Mexicans."
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at him. I said, "Oh, really? Well, explain to me. What does that mean?" Um, and it stops me. And I've gotten that too, where people say, "You're so eloquent. You speak so well." And it's like, really? Like, why would you say that? And honestly, I'm tired of like having to work through my own isms and having to help you work through your stuff. So I think they need to start getting accountable and, and understanding what their actions are and stop being so safe. And, if you really don't know, ask questions and I'll be more than happy to answer. But don't make comments like that, right? And I think we all have to help them to understand that slowly. And Danny, I'm so proud of you. So proud of you, Danny. You go. Um, and these are wonderful. It's building community when we really need a space so much right now.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
thank you, thank you,
100%.
thank you.
Yeah. I mean, whenever I present to clinical groups, right? So behavioral health providers and whatnot, and I always have evaluations at the end, and I always know, te lo juro que I always know who the one person in the room who's gonna give me like a 1 out of 5, okay? Because all presentation I can see in their body language, they don't care about anything that I'm saying. And I'm not there for them. And so there's always going to be those people. And I will not put any energy in trying to change them. But everybody else who needs to hear this, they're going to hear it. And that's how we self-preserve. It's really important to know where not to put your energy into. That's not my fight. And especially now, because there are so many fights on the upfront for us, you have to know what's your fight and what's not. And not every fight is your fight. And that's okay. That's why there's so many of us. My grandfather had 18 children. And I say, he did it to repopulate the island of Puerto Rico. After they decimated our people, okay? He was like, I'm going to repopulate us. It's that kind of stuff that's like, man, that's why there's so many of us.
Right.
We each can have a part. It can all look different, but not every fight is your fight. It's okay for you to take a rest day. It's okay for you to not fight that fight this day. Really important to recognize that.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, I needed to hear from someone like you today. Yeah, because I think all of us, every day we wake up thinking that, what can I do today?
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe today is like, I can rest for my people, because not everybody can rest. So that, even in that, is like, I will take a rest on behalf, of all of
Right.
us. And maybe we can feel that, and send those vibes to each other, or it helps you to be stronger than the next day, right? So it doesn't have to be something big. It could be those small acts of taking our power back.
Right. Yeah, what a powerful presentation again. Thank you so much as always, for an amazing presentation. Like I said, it's healing, it's empowering, and it's inspiring. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, for everything that you do. And yeah, please, people who are present, people who are gonna watch the videos, because this is gonna go also on our website and then our YouTube channel. So please look for the videos and make sure that you contact um, Dr. Pamela Fullerton for to come speak, to you, to your groups, to your students, for anything. As you know, and as you heard, she's just amazing. Thank you, the Alumni Association. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Jesus, all the Alumni Association members who are here. Thank you for everything you do for putting these cafecitos. And looking forward, like I said, if there's no more questions, looking forward to seeing you our next cafecito and our other events that the foundation holds throughout the year. So thank you so much. You have enjoy your day and stay safe.
Adiós a todos.
Sí, cuídense.
Cuídense.